Hi, I'm Jay Odjick, creator and author of KABOOM Blastoff, and this is the True North Country Comics Podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics Podcast, dedicated to celebrate Canadian comic book and graphic novel creators and supporters. I'm John Swinimer. On this episode, I chat with Jay Odjick about his new graphic novel, KABOOM Blastoff, from Scholastic Canada. Please like and subscribe to this website by hitting the subscribe button so you'll be notified about new podcast interviews and article posts. This podcast is available wherever podcasts are enjoyed. Please like, follow, and subscribe. Jay Odjick is an artist, writer, and producer from an Algonquin community just outside of Maniwaki, Quebec. He loved reading comics as a child and eventually went from being a fan to a comic book creator. Indigenous superhero Kagagi appeared first as a graphic novel and is now an animated series broadcast in both English and Algonquin. Jay drew upon his upbringing to illustrate Black Flies, a story set in northern Alberta Reserve about Helen, a young girl whose sister and father have been swept up by a swarm of insects. Jay previously illustrated Munch's story The Ocean Goes On Forever, which appears in the anthology Munch Mania. Jay's latest book is KABOOM Blastoff with illustrations by Casey Oster. The story of KABOOM Blastoff goes like this. When we meet Zack, he's being looked after by his super cool Auntie Jess, and dreaming of one day being like his hero, slick business tycoon Konstantin Pierce. Zack's parents are away yet again for their important careers in refrigerator sales. Little does Zack know their true identities, Greywolf and Shadowbird, are fusion agents on a mission to protect Indigenous artifacts from a nefarious tomb robber. So, without further ado, here's my chat with Jay Odjick about his new graphic novel, KABOOM Blastoff, from Scholastic Canada. So, Jay Odjick, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
Talking about KABOOM.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is great. So, before I get to all the questions, though, I would like to know, what was the first comic book that you read?
I'm going to be honest with you. I started reading comics when I was too young to remember, but I can tell you where I first came to find comics was, so I'm from the Kitigan-Zibi Anishinaabe community in Quebec, which is Algonquin Reservation or First Nation. But I was born in Rochester, New York, because my dad, like a lot of guys from the res, traveled around looking for work because there wasn't a lot back home. So where we lived in Rochester was right up the street from a comic book shop. And the comic shop, what they would do back in those days, and this store did this, I don't know if it was commonplace, but they'd rip off the covers of the books that didn't sell and sell them for like a nickel. So as a kid without a lot of money, that was fantastic because you could walk in with like a quarter, walk out with 5 books. Nowadays, as a guy who makes comics for a living, I'm like, how could you? But at the time, it was fantastic. So I don't remember the first comic, but I know I got into it really young. Like I was probably 4 or 5 years old when I started reading comics. So I can't recall what the first one was.
Great to hear. At least you got reading. This reminds me of when I lived in Trinidad back in the day, and the same sort of thing where the covers are ripped off and you have like a lesser price, but always great to read something, that's for sure. So with that in mind, I'd like to ask, who or what inspires you to create today?
Wow, that's a really deep question. I think for me, the biggest thing is I get to create things that, like, I'm not getting hired to work on titles. Everything I'm doing is my own original concepts. And I'm blessed to be able to be in a position where I can come up with concepts and get them picked up and get them published. So I think what inspires me is just the biggest thing is things I would have liked to have seen as a kid, because there wasn't a lot of First Nations representation in any medium when I was a kid. So for me, it's always just trying to get in touch with like young Jay and what he would have liked to have seen. And that I think keeps me feeling invigorated, and that's where I draw a lot of the inspiration from. At the same time, it just comes from, I think the best thing you can do is just not try to think of like, what are market trends, what's hot right now. I think it always just comes down to picking out projects that you fall in love with and things that you really enjoy and things that you would like to read. My inspiration, this makes me sound like an egomaniac, but my inspiration is myself, I suppose.
Well, there's nothing wrong with that. We met up at last year's Toronto Comic Arts Festival, and it was at that event that you hinted about your new graphic novel, KABOOM Blastoff. So I'm wondering, how would you describe the story for that book?
Yeah, KABOOM Blast Off coming from Scholastic Canada, February 3rd. It's available for pre-order at most places that sell books. KABOOM is both very easy to describe and very hard to describe. I have described it as Spy Kids meet Spider-Man. It's the story of a young kid who believes his parents are refrigerator salespeople, and they're never home because they're always going to these refrigerator conferences. But in reality, they're members of a global Indigenous underground network of Indigenous operatives who are fighting threats against the planet and colonialism and attempting to reclaim stolen Indigenous artifacts. And they're actually two of the most prolific agents in this network. The network gets attacked by a supervillain, and the kid becomes the superhero slash super spy KABOOM and has to save the day. So it's superheroics, high octane action sequences. It's a lot of fun. It's got a lot of heart, and I think it's really funny. So I think it represents a departure for Scholastic, who typically haven't done straight up superhero stuff. I think this is a straight up superhero action piece. And even though it's about a First Nations character, I think KABOOM can appeal to anyone. In our section of where we come from in terms of comics, it's what we would call an all ages book. It's an all ages title. So even though it's coming from Scholastic and the demographic technically is younger readers, I think it'll appeal to any superhero fan because it's just a straight up action, quick pace, summer blockbuster comic, I think.
That's cool. You mentioned previously that your inspiration is what would Jay like to read? So I've got to ask you then, what was your inspiration for creating this particular book?
I think the major thing was in creating this global network of Indigenous operatives, trying to show heroes from different backgrounds, cultures, nations than we've seen presented before. So, for example, in KABOOM, there are Indigenous Siberian, Inuit. We have a hero from Mexico, Indigenous Mexican. So we have these people from all around the world. And the idea for me is to try to help kids to see themselves presented as heroes. And at the same time, I don't think we see a lot of things with that kind of scope in First Nations entertainment content. But like I said, at the end of the day, if you're not Native or you're not Indigenous yourself, it's still just a great time and it's a lot of fun. I mean, it's basically superheroes fighting robots and trying to save the world. I mean, it can appeal to anybody, I think.
Yeah, you can't go wrong with that. That's for sure. Now, I chatted with your illustrator, Casey Oster, a few years ago about the book Rabbit Chase. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the collaborative process with Casey. How did that go?
Casey Oster, I think, is a perfect fit for KABOOM in that their style is really bubbly. It's exciting. I think there's almost a bit of an anime or manga leaning to some of their art, which I think will help the book appeal to kids. And at the same time, the book is bright, it's dynamic, it's fun, and it fits the subject matter, it fits the main character. And I think the whole thing overall is a really cool package. It's a 140-page graphic novel, again, from Scholastic Canada, so it's going to be available everywhere. And I put some things in there for older comic book readers, for people of a certain vintage who remember the days of flipping through a comic and seeing those ads. Remember, you used to have the, like, what were they? Sea monkeys? Things of that nature. So there's actually a couple pages of fake ads in KABOOM, which is a little nod to the comics that I grew up reading. And for the record, as a kid, I got suckered in. I bought sea monkeys. They look nothing like what they presented in the ads. That was the epitome of false advertising. I still feel like they owe me money.
Absolutely. Now, I'd like to get into the weeds just a wee bit and talk about the process that you had with KC. Did you have your script finished and then you sent it off to KC and said, away you go? Or was it a little bit of back and forth as the book went along?
My whole take on the process of drawing comics, like I'll give you an example. I was approached once by a publisher who wanted to hire me to draw a comic, and it was like a period piece, historical fiction kind of thing. And they told me that the writer was, quote, a visionary, and that the writer had ideas about how things should look. So I would have had to deal with not only editorial, but the writer to make sure that their vision came across. And I said, the best advice I ever got when I was around 10 years old, I used to hire, I don't know, maybe even younger than that. I used to hire kids around me to draw comics that I wrote, because in my head as a kid, I thought, if you're older than me, you draw better than me, which turned out not to be the case. And I was coaching this one kid who was a couple years older than me. I was paying him like a toonie or something. And I was coaching him on how I wanted Batman's ears drawn. And that kid gave me the best advice I ever got, which was, if you want it to look that way, why don't you draw it yourself? And I still don't have an argument for that. And what I told this publisher was, I think if the visionary, quote unquote, wants it to look a certain way, the visionary should learn to draw it himself. The way I approach writing a comic script, because I came from this having worked on the Kagagi TV show where I was the lead writer and the showrunner. And scripts for TV or film are very different from comics in that there's less dictation as to content. Things are written for actors in a way that they can kind of interpret them. For example, we don't tell actors, here's how your character's feeling. That has to be conveyed in the dialogue, right? So I try to approach comics the same way and just present KC with a script that allows them room to interpret and collaborate as opposed to me micromanaging, because that defeats the purpose. If I want complete control over how everything looks, then I should draw it myself. So in every comic project I do, my scripts are very loose. They're more like notes to the artist saying like, hey, you do this one thing really well. I think we could do something like that here. So my advice to writers who are looking to work in comics is try to do your due diligence, learn your artists, learn what they do, learn their strengths, and try to play to those. So my process is probably different from a lot of other people's, but I think it just comes down to valuing your collaborators and making sure that they feel like they're contributing and not just being hired to do a job or being told what to do. So I think KABOOM is a very collaborative thing. I've been lucky and blessed with all the projects I'm working on to have very talented artists. So hopefully KC enjoyed the process as much as I did.
Sure. Now, you just hinted about some advice, but I'm wondering, because you're both a writer and artist, I'm wondering if there's one piece of advice you give to someone who wants to create their first graphic novel. What would you say to them?
Well, my number one thing was for myself. I started out drawing and I transitioned into writing after. So with Scholastic, for example, that came about because I drew these two books by prolific, famed, renowned author Robert Munsch. So that kind of helped make my name, and that kind of boosted me in the publishing industry. So I wasn't primarily known as a writer. I was known as an artist. And I think that's one of the biggest pieces of advice I can give is that, like, take on projects that you feel strongly about, that you believe in, but that can help you build your name. It can be hard when you're starting out to break into any industry. And a lot of people will come to me with ideas for stories. Their magnum opus, that thing you've always wanted to do. And my advice to them tends to be maybe try to find your footing first. Work on some shorter things. Find who you are as a writer. David Mack told me when I was probably in my early 20s, he gave me some advice. And I'm going to paraphrase because he used the cuss word. What David told me was, you've got about 300 crappy pages in you. You got to get those out of your system. And that was actually very solid advice. At the time, 300 pages sounded like so much, right? But as I worked and as I drew those pages, I realized that I was getting better and learning what I was good at and what I wasn't. So the most important advice is always to remember that the you that exists today is not going to exist in 10 years. You're going to look back at your stuff and probably cringe. But it's all about putting in the work, getting the reps in, and getting better. So that would be my primary advice, would be to try to work on things that can help elevate your profile and do things that you believe in. Don't be afraid to put in the work, because drawing comics, I don't know about writing comics, it's a different thing, but drawing comics is very time intensive. It can be very grueling. So working on your own things is a great way to develop the work ethic that's needed to succeed in comics, because it is a lot of work. And the other thing I think that is, of course, very important with comics is specifically, you have to do it for the love of the game. You can't approach comics as we have to look at it as a business, right? But you have to do it because you love it. And at the end of the day, what that comes down to is, as far as advice goes, if you want to do it, you just want it, probably don't. If you need to do it, you're going to do it no matter what I tell you. Follow your heart. If it's in your heart, then it is possible. And if I can do it, anyone can do it.
That's good advice for sure. We're here talking about your new book and a podcast. I'm wondering, do you have any other plans to promote your graphic novel?
So part of the benefit of working with a machine as large as Scholastic is I'm in touch with them and a marketing team and PR, and we're figuring out like appearances at book fairs. In Quebec, we have what's called the Salon du Livre. I'm lining those up. I'd like to get back to the Comic-Cons in Canada. I've done Ottawa Comic-Con, Winnipeg Comic-Con. I'd like to talk with the organizers of those and see if we can set something up there. We're setting up a lot of interviews and things like that. But this is actually my first KABOOM interview. So it's been fun. It's great to finally talk about the book because it's a 140-page graphic novel. So the art's taken a while, and it's great just to be able to share it and get the word out there that it exists. And seeing people online excited about it has been very rewarding. So it's great.
Good. We've been talking about KABOOM Blast Off, and I know you're really excited about it, but do you have any other projects on the go that you're allowed to talk about?
Allowed to talk about part, I think, is the hitch, but here's what I can say. KABOOM, of course, is different from the comics I grew up reading, where I grew up reading DC and Marvel monthlies. KABOOM is a different animal in the way that it's this 140-page graphic novel, which is roughly the equivalent of like 7 issues, right? 6, 7 issues. So it's this fully functional graphic novel that's one complete story. I can tell you that the KABOOM book deal I signed is for 3. So we're doing 3 volumes of KABOOM. The second volume is written. We're locking in the final script right now. So that'll get started in terms of production on the artwork side of things very soon. I've done a bunch of character designs and things for that. I have another graphic novel at Scholastic called I Am Thunder that is being colored right now, colored and lettered, I believe. And that's about myself as a kid and how I came to comics on the res and how I kind of came to understand my father. So it's a bit of a departure. It's more of a bit of a coming of age, more grounded tale. It's not as fantastic as something like KABOOM. Other than that, I think next year, it's a little early to say because I don't think we have a release date. I have another book that'll be coming from Portage and Main Press. That's Indigenous fantasy. So think something like Dungeons and Dragons, but instead of set in a medieval fantasy setting, it's set in a world very similar or inspired by North America pre-contact. So that's something I've never seen before, and I'm really excited to do something like that. It's very sword and sorcery, but with an Indigenous flavor. Next summer, we'll see the release of my debut, my first novel, which I don't think I can say much about it, but it's coming from Penguin Random House Tundra. It's a YA horror, fantasy, comedy, action. It's got a little bit of everything. I describe it as Stranger Things meets Ghostbusters on the res. I think that's pretty much all I'm able to disclose, but I'm going to be a busy boy for I think my schedule in terms of writing is pretty filled in until something like 2029. So just a really, really blessed career to be in. A busy time. I'll sleep in 2029.
It sounds like you got a lot on the go. So with that in mind, Jay, I'm wondering, where can you recommend people go online to find out about your current and your future projects?
Sure. I'm on Instagram at Jay Odjick. That's at JODJICK. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Threads, on Blue Sky. You can find me at any of those places. You can also go to kagagi.squarespace.com, which is a website. I don't really update much, but it has all of the 13 episodes of the Kagagi TV series that was broadcast. I guess it's been about 10 years ago now. All the scripts are there to download. So if you ever want to check that out, that would be cool. But yeah, hit me up on social media if you have any questions or anything. I'd be more than happy to hear from you. I try to be as active as I can on social media, but with my current schedule, it can be a little hard to be, I'm not the most prolific social media poster, and I'm getting old. So you gotta bear with me. I'm not on the TikToks yet.
Well, Jay, those are all the questions I have for you, but I'm wondering, is there something I didn't ask that you'd like to get across in this interview?
I think the main thing is, if there was anything I could say to people, it's that if you are somebody who's never seen yourself represented in a positive way in a media and a form of media, I think that's a very real thing. And everything I have done professionally has been to try to help change things and try to create opportunities. And my people ask me, what is the most important thing in my career? Or what was the thing that helped me make it to where I've gotten to? And I think my superpower is being stubborn. At the end of the day, we become convinced that stubborn is a negative, but stubborn can be a very positive thing in your life to have. So the most important thing, more than anything else, if you're somebody who wants to work in some field where traditionally people like you have never been represented, the most important thing is just to believe in yourself, be stubborn, and always remember, while you have to be your own toughest critic, the most important thing is to be hard on yourself without getting down on yourself. If you can do that, anything will be possible.
Thanks to Jay for the chat. You can discover more about Jay Odjick on Instagram at JODJICK. And thank you for tuning into the True North Country Comics podcast. I invite you to visit the True North Country Comics website to listen to even more conversations about creators' insight on making comic books and graphic novels. I also encourage you to subscribe via the website so you'll be notified about new podcast interviews and article posts. This podcast is available wherever podcasts are enjoyed. Please like, follow, and subscribe. You can follow along True North Country Comics on most social media sites. And you're encouraged to send any and all feedback to john@truenorthcountrycomics.com. Thanks for tuning in, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics Podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2026.